We had 4 years of stocking from 1996 to 1999. We had a pretty comprehensive investigation. And there's a publication and there are reports from this study. There were a lot of marked steelhead out in the system, and we learned quite a bit. And so I'm going to give you the highlights of what we learned from that work. And maybe if there's time at the end, I can talk about some of the new things we have going, or just let you know that they are going. There will be 2 parts to this presentation. The first one is going to be talking about the strain comparison component of the study. And the second large component of the study was stocking location. And that stocking location being upstream versus downstream, or at some intermediate location in the different rivers. So for the strain comparison, I'm putting this up. We did publish this result, so you can go get it anytime you want to. It's in the North American Journal of Fisheries Management, 2018, volume 38. And so, yeah, and you should be able to just Google that and pick it up. This is the design of the study. This is the design of the strain component of the study. We had the 2 rivers, the Manistee River and the St. Joe River. And we had multiple locations within those rivers. And you can see the triangles in here are the different locations that we stocked fish at in the system. And in the Manistee River, we had 2 locations upstream for the strain comparison. And then these H's on these graphs are the Bodine State Fish Hatchery, and where the, sorry, I'm blanking, Wolf Lake State Hatchery is. So the first thing I'm going to cover as results from that study, and again, this is right out of the publication, is the age structure of the catch. And the age structure of the catch, it shows us that there are more 2- and 3-year-old Michigan strain fish being captured than there are Skamania strain fish, okay? And in the older fish, the 4s and 5-year-olds, there is no difference in the catch rate between the 2 strains. And for some reason, my presentation does not have my notes slides up, which is frustrating. And so the seasonal river fishery returns are the next area. And what I want you to orient you with this graph, we're into the catch rates, which you saw in Tracy's presentation, and now we know what those are. These are adjusted for the number stocked. Because the design of this study was a paired design where at each of those locations we stocked similar numbers of both strains, we, in this analysis, adjusted not only for the angling hours, but also for the number of fish that were stocked to equalize those 2 things so they don't bias outcomes. Now, the other thing with these figures, and you'll see several of them, is it's not intuitive, but we go from summer to fall to spring, and it's kind of following a steelhead through a season. And so on these graphs, the first bars are the summer fishery, second is fall, and the third is spring. And the take-home message here is, in the summer, we saw similar returns of both strains in the St. Joseph River. But in the Manistee River, we saw better returns of the Skamania strain in the summer. In the fall, Michigan strain returned better than the Skamania strain. And again, these are the river fishery returns, not open lake, so just to be clear. And then in the spring, the Michigan strain by far and away returned at higher rates than the Skamania strain. So whenever, as Tracy mentioned in her talk, whenever we talk about fisheries, we need to kind of consider effort, right? And then also when we're making management decisions about what strains we're stocking or where we're stocking them, we want to know what kind of fishery it's feeding, right? So this plot here is talking about the seasonal fishery effort in rivers. And we have the Manistee River and the St. Joe River. Again, you have the summer, fall, and spring alignment. And the summer season in the Manistee River has low effort, whereas most of that effort is focused in the spring and the fall, which is perhaps not that surprising to many of you. On the St. Joe River, it's more evenly distributed, with the highest effort occurring in the fall for both rivers. So then the next question becomes, in that open lake fishery, how are things returning as a whole and then to individual ports? So what we have found is that in general, fish that were stocked in the Manistee River, the Skamania strain return at slightly higher rates than the Michigan strain in the open lake fishery. And that is for fish that were stocked in the Manistee River. And for fish that were stocked in the St. Joe River, returns are more even, with the exception of the port of St. Joseph, which has higher returns of Skamania strain fish. So this looks really complicated, but hopefully I can explain it to you and make it simple. You have the fishery that the fishery that we're talking about is over here. So this is the Manistee River fishery, the St. Joe River fishery, and the Lake Michigan fishery. And then we have the river that was stocked, okay? So the outcomes from those rivers. And then we have these performance metrics. So this is kind of the overview. How does Skamania relate to the Little Manistee River Michigan run fish? So for overall catch rates across seasons, if we say, if we have a hypothesis that the Little Manistee River are fewer than the Skamania strain in the summer, we statistically tested that and found that to be true. Okay, so our hypothesis was in the summer, Little Manistee River returned at a lower rate than the Skamania strain. Okay, and that's in the Manistee River for fish stocked in the Manistee, and that was true. In the fall, we said that Little Manistee River was equal to Skamania, and that was true. In the spring, we said that Little Manistee River would be greater than Skamania, and that also was true. Then we wanted to go look at, because another thing that happens when we talk about managing Skamania versus Michigan strain is, an angler satisfaction result would be, what is your catch rate of trophy fish? Are they bigger? Are they better? And so we looked at fish that were greater than 32 inches in the catch. And we made a hypothesis that there would be no difference between the two strains. And that was true. Angler effort, we hypothesized would be similar between the spring and summer. And that was false. Angler effort was higher in the spring than it was in the summer. Again, all those results I just gave you were for the Manistee River with fish stocked in the Manistee River. So now we'll go to the St. Joe River with fish stocked in the St. Joe River in a similar format, okay? And we found that the first statement that the Little Manistee River fish are Skamania was false for the summer fishery. And actually, the Little Manistee River and the Skamania strain were equal to each other in the summer fishery in the St. Joe River. For fall, we hypothesized that they would be equal to each other, and they were. And in the spring, we said that the Little Manistee River form would be greater than the Skamania form, and that was true. Trophy fisheries, we looked at a hypothesis that they were equal, and they were. Angler effort, we hypothesized would be the same between the spring and summer, and that was false, and it was the inverse of what we saw on the Manistee River. We saw a lower catch rates or lower effort in the spring than in the summer. Okay. Now the last part of this is looking at the open lake fishery. So this is open lake, Lake Michigan, those 9 ports that you saw in the earlier graph, and the stocked river. And we're comparing the overall CPUE and the trophy CPUE. And in each case, these are the spring, summer seasons only. And we are looking at a hypothesis that says Little Manistee River is equal to the Skamania form. So we rejected that for the Manistee River stocked fish and found that the Skamania returned at a higher rate than the Little Manistee River did. The trophy was inconclusive, oopsie, because of sample size, so we don't have a result for that. And then the St. Joe River, we found that both hypotheses were true and that there were equal returns between the two strains. Then we looked at growth, because that's another thing. Do the Skamania get bigger, the trophy thing? And we wanted to see, is there a strain effect in the growth rates of these fish? And the answer is no. The only effect we saw for growth rates is what's circled in red here, and that's between males and females. And there is definitely different growth rates between males and females, but the strain effect is not significant. So to kind of wrap up what we just learned about strains, season, strain, and stocking location all influence steelhead angling performance related to angler motivation, which is effort, satisfaction, which is catch rate, and size. So for effort, we found the highest fishing effort in rivers in the fall. Summer versus spring, the effort was higher in the summer on the St. Joe River and higher in spring on the Manistee River. In the river, for catch rates in the rivers, spring fisheries on both rivers had higher catch rates of the Little Manistee River strain relative to the Skamania form. Summer fisheries on the Manistee River saw catch rates that were higher for Skamania relative to the Little Manistee form. And on the St. Joe River, there were similar catch rates for Little Manistee River and Skamania forms. Fall fisheries in both rivers slightly favored the Little Manistee River form. From Lake Michigan fisheries, the returns from the St. Joe River stocked fish of the two strains returned similarly in the open lake fishery. And returns were higher for Skamania steelhead only at the port of St. Joseph. Returns from the Manistee River stocked fish, Skamania returned slightly better to the open lake fishery with the 9 ports combined, and there were no port-specific distinctions like we saw in the St. Joe River. And the catch statistics showed us that there was an effect on gender, but not of the two strains. They were similarly sized at age. So then the second part that is not published, but there is a final report written about this, this is the evaluation of stocking location. Now, it's interesting to know that when we did this evaluation, or very early in the study, we actually changed our stocking practices considerably because it stood out so strong to us. So I'm happy to be sharing this with you. Prior to the 1996 to 1999 stocking study, we had been working with a limited amount of data that Paul Steelbach had collected from 1988 to 1990. And the results from that little bit of data led people to believe that we were better off stocking steelhead at the mouth or closer to as close to the lake as we possibly could. And so I'm going to walk you through how they got there, and then we'll show you how we found something very different and what that looks like relative to what Paul had been reporting at the time. So this is Paul's work from the Grand River. And you have the different years of stocking are different colors. And then the blue with the yellow outline is all years combined. So that's really what you need to look at. And in the Grand River, this was the big money graph, right? Where that red circle is. If you were down at the mouth, you survived substantially better than anyone upstream, okay? And so this is a large part of what drove those earlier stocking practices. Now, he did have some data from the St. Joe River during a similar time frame, And it was less obvious where the upstream downstream effect was, but it was so strong in the Grand that they kind of decided, well, maybe it's best practices to just go down to the mouth. So then we come into our study, which Paul helped design, by the way, because he wanted to see this replicated more and get better statistical rigor. And so we began our study 96 to 99 stocking. And this isn't the best figure because it's old, but I just wanted to put it up to show you that we do have more rivers involved in this upstream downstream comparison than we did in the strain comparison. So here we're able to look at the Sturgeon, the Au Sable, Manistee, Muskegon, and St. Joseph. So the returns from the St. Joe River, and this is to Great Lakes Creel from collections of 96 to 04, show pretty similar results upstream, downstream in the St. Joe River. So this is the site closest to the mouth. And then as you move right, you get further inland. And we were astounded by this because there are many barriers on the St. Joe River that these fish have to go through. But it appears to have no impact on their survival, the stocking location. So that started changing us. And just to give you a feel for where Paul was at is the orange, where we're at is the yellow. And, oh, I'm going to back. Yeah, nope, that's it. And then the Muskegon River, it's almost like you get an upward survival trend the further away from the mouth you go. So the lake outlet versus Pine Street, you just see this ramp up in survival. So that started getting us to thinking that maybe we shouldn't be looking at it that way. The Sturgeon River, we had very few returns from the UP. The UP did not produce substantial fisheries for the open lake. And so the few fish that we did have were from the mouth at the Sturgeon River and not the upstream site. Here's the Au Sable River, where you have the harbor and then you have Rio Road. And again, a substantial increase in survival when you plant upstream as opposed to at the mouth. So that resulted in changing our stocking practices and being less reticent to put fish upstream. So that, in a nutshell, is what I was going to put together for Steelhead. I could answer any questions, and if I had a few minutes, I could talk to you about a little bit about the otolith microchemistry work and the modeling and just let you know we're doing it. As this is the year of Steelhead for Dan, this is also my year of Steelhead, and we're going to try to get the population models that feed the predator-prey ratios up to speed for Steelhead this year, and hopefully they'll be developed. I'll be collecting a lot of data and bringing it together, hopefully giving more reports on more recent information for Steelhead to you in the near future.